They found her crying in an old, uncompleted house, her stomach heavy with a child, her eyes swollen and lost. She was only 15. Her clothes were torn, her feet dusty, and her voice weak from calling for help that never came. That morning, the old couple who owned the house stood frozen at the door. The woman whispered, "Who are you, my child?" And that was how Vivian's story began to be told. Before that day, Vivian's life had been beautiful. Her father, Mr. Daniel, was a rich businessman in the city of Abuja. He owned cars, houses, and many plots of land. Her mother, Miriam, was a gentlewoman who took care of the home and their 2 children, Vivian, who was 5, and her little brother, Frank, who was 3. Their home was full of laughter. Vivian's father often carried her on his shoulder while Frank ran behind them. They had everything a family could wish for. But happiness, they say, does not stay too long. One rainy evening, Mr. Daniel went out for a business meeting and never came back. His car was found the next morning in a ditch by the express road. He was gone forever. Miriam's world broke into pieces that day. Her husband's brothers came to comfort her at first, but soon their true faces showed. They took the car keys, the documents, and even the clothes her husband left behind. They told her that as a woman, she knew nothing about business and that everything her husband owned now belonged to the family. Miriam cried and begged, but no one listened. In less than 2 months, everything was gone, the cars, the house, even the savings. She and her children were left with nothing. With no place to stay, she packed a few clothes and returned to her late husband's village. Life there was different. The fine city clothes made no sense in the dusty streets of the village. People whispered behind her back, some mocking, some pitying. Vivian missed her father every day. At night, she would wake up crying, calling his name. Frank was too small to understand what had happened, but he always asked, "Mama, when is Daddy coming back?" Miriam tried to be strong, but survival in the village was hard. She had no skill, no money, and 2 children to feed. She farmed when she could, fetched firewood to sell, and begged for small help from neighbors. Still, food was not enough. One evening, after struggling to get food for the day, her elder sister Auntie Grace came from Jos to visit. She looked at the thin, hungry children and said, "Miriam, let me help you. Send Vivian to me in Jos. I will take care of her and send her to school." Miriam hesitated. Vivian was only 7, still small and tender. But hunger makes even a mother's heart weak. So, with tears, she agreed. She hugged Vivian tightly that night and whispered, "Be strong, my daughter. Auntie Grace will take care of you. One day, we will all be together again." The next morning, Auntie Grace took Vivian away. Vivian waved goodbye, her little hand trembling, her eyes wet with tears. She didn't know that she was waving at her childhood for the last time. Because the city she was going to, the city called Jos, would not be kind to her. The journey to Jos was long and rough. Vivian sat quietly beside her auntie in the old bus, clutching her small bag. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and her heart felt heavy. When they arrived, Jos looked different from Abuja. The air was colder, the streets dusty, and the houses looked old. Auntie Grace's house stood at the end of a small road, a 2-room flat with a small shop in front. The moment they entered, Vivian saw 2 little boys playing in the sitting room. "Come and greet your cousin," Auntie Grace said. The boys looked up, frowned, and continued playing. From that day, Vivian stopped being treated like a visitor. The next morning, before the sun rose, Auntie Grace's voice thundered through the house. "Vivian, stand up. Go and fetch water. Sweep the compound." Vivian ran out barefoot, shivering from the cold. She fetched water, swept, cooked, and helped bathe her cousins before they went to school. By the time she finished and got ready for her own school, it was already late. At school, the teachers flogged her for coming late. Her uniform was never clean. Some days, she came to class without breakfast. Her classmates laughed at her. They called her dirty girl. Still, she tried her best. She loved learning. But every time she smiled, something at home wiped it away. After school, while her classmates went home to rest, Vivian would rush to her auntie's provision store. Arrange the goods, wash the bottles, and then go and sell pure water, her auntie would say. So, every afternoon, she carried a bowl of drinks and pure water on her head, walking from street to street under the sun. She walked barefoot until her legs hurt. Sometimes, she would make only a few naira. When she returned home, Auntie Grace would count the money carefully. If one bottle is missing, I beat you, she often warned. And when anything broke in the house, a plate, a cup, even a spoon, Vivian got the beating. Even when her cousins caused trouble, Auntie Grace would shout, "Vivian, it's your fault." At night, she lay on a small mat near the kitchen, crying softly so no one would hear. One morning, the headmistress at her school called her into the office. "Vivian," she said softly, "why do you always come late? Why do you always look so tired?" Vivian tried to hide her tears, but they came anyway. She told the woman everything, the housework, the hawking, the beatings. The headmistress listened and held her hand. From that day, the teacher stopped flogging her. But at home, nothing changed. Her cousins insulted her. "Smelling girl," they would say. Her auntie beat her more, calling her lazy and useless. Vivian stopped hoping for love in that house. She only looked forward to school, the only place she felt a little free. Years passed like that. Every day was the same: work, insults, hunger, and tears. But one evening, when Vivian turned 14, something far darker entered her life. Something that would change her forever. The harmattan wind blew cold that night. The air was quiet, and the sky was full of stars. Vivian had just finished washing the dishes and was folding her school uniform when she heard her uncle's voice behind her. "Vivian," he said softly, "come here." She turned around slowly. Her uncle, a man she had always feared, stood by the door. His eyes looked strange that night. "Yes, uncle," she whispered. He smiled, the kind of smile that made her heart beat fast, not from joy, but from fear. "Come closer," he said again. From that night, Vivian's world changed. At first, she didn't understand what was happening. Her uncle would call her whenever Auntie Grace was not around. He would touch her, whispering that if she ever told anyone, he would kill her. She tried to avoid him, but in that house, there was no hiding place. Whenever her auntie went to the market or traveled, her uncle would come into the small kitchen where Vivian slept. After each night, she cried silently until her eyes swelled. She wanted to tell someone, maybe the headmistress at school, but fear locked her mouth. Each morning, she still had to cook, sweep, and go hawk in the street like nothing had happened. At school, the teachers noticed she had changed. She became quiet. Her friends thought she was proud, but she was only broken. One day, her auntie returned home earlier than expected and found Vivian shaking and crying in the corner of her room. "What is wrong with you?" she shouted. Vivian wanted to speak, but no words came out. Her auntie slapped her and ordered her to continue her work. From that day, Vivian stopped trying to explain her pain. She stopped laughing, stopped smiling. The joy that used to light her eyes had gone out. Months passed, and her body began to change. She didn't understand it at first, the nausea, the tiredness, the way her dresses became tighter. But soon, even her auntie noticed. One afternoon, Auntie Grace called her. "Vivian, what is this nonsense I'm hearing? You're pregnant." Vivian stood still, shaking. "Who is responsible?" her auntie screamed. Vivian could not speak. Tears ran down her cheeks. When she said nothing, Auntie Grace's anger grew. She beat her again and again, shouting that Vivian had brought shame to her house. That night, Vivian wished she would not wake up again. By morning, Auntie Grace had already packed her things. "You will go back to your mother," she said coldly. "Let her see the kind of useless daughter she raised." Vivian begged her not to send her away, but it was useless. Her auntie's heart was made of stone. The next day, they began the long journey back to the village. Vivian sat quietly in the bus, holding her stomach and crying silently. The city she had come to find love in had broken her instead. She didn't know that the worst part of her story was still waiting for her at home. The journey back to the village was long and silent. Vivian sat beside her auntie, staring out the window as the road rolled past trees, dust, and faraway hills. Her heart pounded each time she thought about her mother. Would her mother believe her? Would she forgive her? When they finally arrived, it was evening. The sun was going down behind the palm trees, and the village smelled of wood smoke. Miriam came out from the small kitchen behind the house, surprised to see them. "Oh, Sister Grace. You didn't tell me you were coming," she said with a tired smile. But her smile disappeared when she saw Vivian's stomach. Grace did not waste time. She began to talk fast, her words sharp like a knife. "Your daughter has brought shame to my house. She's been following men in the city. Imagine, a small girl. I could not keep her any longer. Take her. She's your problem now." Vivian fell to her knees, crying. "Mama, please, it's not true," she tried to say, but Miriam's face had already turned to stone. "Vivian," she said in a trembling voice, "is it true? Tell me who did this." Vivian wanted to tell her the truth about the nights of fear, about her uncle, but the words refused to come. She remembered his warning, "If you tell anyone, I will kill you." So she stayed silent. Miriam looked at her, shaking her head. "You have disgraced me," she said softly. "You have brought shame to your father's name." That night, she refused to let Vivian sleep inside. She gave her a small mat and told her to stay under the veranda. Frank came out in the night and whispered, "Sister, don't cry. I'll talk to Mama." But Vivian just hugged him and said, "Don't worry, my brother. One day, everything will be fine." The next morning, Miriam woke her up. "Leave my house," she said coldly. "I can't feed a prostitute." Vivian begged, kneeling in the dust. "Mama, please, I have nowhere to go." But Miriam didn't look back. She went inside and closed the door. Vivian sat there for a long time, her eyes burning, her heart empty. Then she stood up, wiped her tears, and started walking. She didn't know where she was going. She just kept walking until her legs were weak. At the edge of the village, she found an old uncompleted building, walls without windows, no doors, no roof. She went inside and sat in a corner. That became her new home. Every morning, she went to the market to hawk pure water and soft drinks. She used the little money she made to buy food and small clothes for herself. Some nights she went hungry. Other nights, she sat in the darkness, rubbing her stomach, whispering, "Don't worry, my baby. Mama is here." The months passed slowly. Her stomach grew bigger, and the nights became colder. Still, she endured. But one morning, as she was washing her face outside the building, an old car stopped in front of the compound. An elderly couple stepped out, holding hands. They looked surprised to see her there. "My child," the woman said softly, "what are you doing in this place?" Vivian looked up at them, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't know it yet, but that question would change her life forever. The old woman's eyes softened as she looked at Vivian sitting by the wall of the uncompleted house. Her clothes were torn, her face pale, and her belly round with pregnancy. "My child," the woman said again, "why are you here? Where are your parents?" Vivian could not speak at first. Her lips trembled, and tears rolled down her cheeks. The old man moved closer and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Don't be afraid," he said kindly. "We will not harm you. Tell us your story." And so, for the first time, Vivian told everything about her father's death, her mother's struggle, the suffering in Jos, and how she ended up living in the streets. The couple listened quietly. When she finished, the old woman wiped her own tears and said, "God led us here today for a reason." Their names were Papa Edward and Mama Rose, a retired teacher and his wife. All their children lived abroad, and they often came to check on the uncompleted house they hoped to finish one day. That same evening, they took Vivian home. For the first time in many years, Vivian slept in a real bed. The sheets were clean, and the room smelled of soap and love. She woke up several times that night, thinking it was a dream. Mama Rose treated her like her own daughter. She bought her new clothes, took her to the clinic for checkups, and fed her well. Papa Edward always said, "You are safe now, my child. What is gone is gone. Look forward." When the day of her delivery came, Mama Rose was by her side. After many hours of pain, Vivian gave birth to a baby girl, small, beautiful, and full of life. She looked at the tiny face and whispered, "Your name will be Juliet. You are my joy after many tears." The couple rejoiced with her. They decided to make it official. They adopted her as their own daughter. From that moment, Vivian's life began to heal. She started going back to school. At first, she was shy. She was older than most of the students, but she worked hard. Every day, she studied with determination, saying to herself, "I will not waste this second chance." Mama Rose always encouraged her. "Don't let your past define you," she would say. "Let it make you stronger." Years passed, and Vivian grew into a fine young woman. She finished secondary school with good results. Papa Edward and Mama Rose celebrated her like she was their own blood. Then they sent her to one of the best universities in the country to study medicine. At the university, Vivian worked hard. Sometimes, she stayed up all night reading. Each time she felt tired, she would remember her mother's face, her brother Frank, and the pain of the past, and that would give her strength. Her daughter Juliet grew under Mama Rose's loving care, healthy and happy. Whenever Vivian came home for holidays, Juliet would run to her shouting, "Mommy," and hug her tightly. It was a new beginning. The girl who once slept in an uncompleted house now dreamed of saving lives. But even as her life grew brighter, the shadows of her past still followed her quietly, waiting for the day they would return. Time moved like the wind, fast and silent. Years passed, and Vivian grew from a frightened girl into a strong young woman. She had faced hunger, pain, and shame, but she refused to give up. At the university, she worked harder than anyone else. When other students went out to party, Vivian stayed in her small room reading her books. She knew she was not just studying for herself, she was studying for Juliet, for Papa Edward and Mama Rose, and for every child who had ever been forgotten. When the final exams came, she passed with flying colors. She graduated as a medical doctor, the best in her department. The day she received her certificate, Mama Rose cried tears of joy. Papa Edward lifted his walking stick and said proudly, "My daughter, you have made us proud. You are a gift from God." Vivian smiled, her heart full. For the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. Soon after, she got a job in one of the biggest government hospitals in Abuja. Her name tag read, Dr. Vivian Daniel. Every morning, she walked through the hospital corridors in her white coat, helping patients, saving lives. People respected her. Some called her the doctor with the kind eyes. At night, she would come home to her daughter, Juliet, now a bright little girl in one of the best schools in the city. Vivian made sure Juliet never lacked anything she once lacked: love, care, and hope. Even though life was now good, there were things Vivian still could not forget. She sent money home to her mother every month, but she never visited. Each time Mama Rose asked her why, she would smile sadly and say, "Someone's still hurt, Mama. Time will heal them." Frank, her younger brother, was now a grown man. He sometimes called her on the phone. "Vivian," he would say, "Mama always talks about you. She wants to see you." Vivian would pause for a long time before answering, "Not yet, Frank. Not yet." She carried her past like a hidden scar, invisible, but deep. One morning, while she was preparing Juliet for school, there was a knock on her door. When she opened it, she froze. Standing there was her mother, Miriam, and beside her was Frank. Vivian's hands shook. "Mama." "Frank, what are you doing here?" Miriam smiled weakly. Her hair was now gray, and her eyes looked tired. "My daughter," she said, "we came to see you. It's been many years." Vivian stood still. The room was quiet except for Juliet's small voice saying, "Mommy, who are they?" Vivian could not answer. The memories came rushing back, the cold night she was thrown out, the hunger, the tears. Frank stepped forward and said softly, "Sister, please don't be angry. We came in peace. Mama has missed you." Vivian nodded slowly and led them in. They sat together, but the silence was heavy. After a while, Miriam looked up and said, "Vivian, why haven't you married? And why didn't you come for the burial of your cousin, Grace's son? He died in a gang fight. Even his brother is now in a rehabilitation center. They were your cousins, you know." Vivian's heart began to beat fast. She stood up, her voice shaking. "Mama, don't ask me that. You don't know what I went through in that house." Miriam frowned. "What do you mean?" And just like that, the pain she had buried for years began to rise. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Mama, that man, Auntie Grace's husband, he was the one who hurt me. He is the father of my child." Miriam gasped. "What?" Vivian nodded, crying now. "I wanted to tell you. I wanted to tell everyone. But he threatened to kill me. I was just a child, Mama. I was only 14. The room went silent. Frank's face turned pale. Miriam covered her mouth with her hands, shaking her head in disbelief. Vivian continued, her voice breaking. "You threw me out when I needed you the most. I begged you, but you didn't even look back. That's how I ended up in that house, until the old couple found me." Tears rolled down Miriam's cheeks. "My daughter. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Frank stood up, angry and determined. "I'll find out the truth," he said. "If what you're saying is true, that man will pay." Vivian wiped her eyes. "Frank, please be careful," she whispered. But Frank had already made up his mind. Frank could not sleep that night. His sister's words kept ringing in his ears. "He was the one who hurt me. He is the father of my child." He tossed on his bed, his heart burning with anger and shame. All these years, they had believed lies, lies told by Auntie Grace. At dawn, Frank got dressed quietly and told his mother, "Mama, I'm going to Jos. I must know the truth with my own eyes." Miriam wanted to stop him, but she saw the fire in his eyes and said nothing. The road to Jos was long, but Frank didn't care. He went straight to Auntie Grace's house, the same house where Vivian had suffered. The walls looked old, the paint fading, but the memories inside were still alive. Auntie Grace was sitting in front of her shop when she saw him. "Oh, Frank," she said, surprised. "What brings you here?" Frank sat down slowly. "Auntie," he said calmly, "I came to ask about Vivian." Grace's face changed a little. "That girl," she scoffed. "Don't remind me of her. She brought shame to my family." Frank looked her straight in the eyes. "Auntie, tell me the truth. Who got her pregnant?" Grace blinked. "I don't know." She refused to say. "Maybe it was one of those boys she used to follow around." "Don't lie to me," Frank cut in, his voice sharp. "Vivian said your husband was the one." Auntie Grace froze. Her lips trembled. What did you just say?" "She said your husband touched her when she was just 14, Frank continued, his voice steady. "Is it true?" For a moment, Grace said nothing. Then tears slowly filled her eyes. I didn't know," she whispered. "There were times I suspected something was wrong, but I never asked. I thought she was just lazy. I never knew he could do such a thing." Frank stood up, his fist clenched. "Where is he now?" Grace looked down. "He's still around?" "He's an old man now, but if what she said is true, he deserves to face the law." Frank nodded and left immediately. He went straight to the police station. By the next day, the man, the uncle who had ruined Vivian's childhood, was arrested. At first, he denied everything. But when Frank brought proof, old letters, neighbors who remembered seeing strange things, and finally, a DNA test that proved Juliet was his child, the truth came out. The whole community was shocked. The news spread fast, the man who destroyed his wife's niece has been exposed. He was taken to court and sentenced to prison for rape and child abuse. When Frank told Vivian the news, she broke down in tears. Not tears of pain this time, but tears of release. The weight she had carried for years finally lifted. For the first time, she could breathe freely. Miriam also wept when she heard. She held Vivian's hands and said, "My daughter, I failed you. I was blind when I should have seen. Please forgive me." Vivian hugged her mother and whispered, "I forgave you long ago, Mama. I just needed you to believe me." Frank too knelt before her. "I'm sorry, sister," he said. "I should have protected you." Vivian smiled through her tears. "You did, Frank. You found the truth." Even Auntie Grace came later, her face heavy with shame. She begged for forgiveness. Vivian looked at her and said softly, "I forgive you, Auntie. I forgive everyone. I will not carry this pain forever." That day, a wound that had stayed open for many years began to close. After the truth came out, peace slowly began to return to Vivian's life. It didn't happen in one day, but little by little, the anger in her heart began to fade. Her mother, Miriam, started visiting often. Each time she came, she brought food, fruits, and sometimes local beads for Juliet. She would sit quietly, watching her daughter and granddaughter laugh together. Sometimes, she cried softly and said, "Vivian, you are stronger than I ever was. You are my pride now." Frank also became close to her again. He had found work in a nearby city, and each weekend, he visited his sister and her daughter. He and Juliet became good friends. He always said, "You are the reason I believe in second chances." Vivian was still living with Papa Edward and Mama Rose. They had grown older, but their hearts were still young and full of kindness. Vivian took care of them as if they were her real parents. She made sure their medicine was always available, paid for helpers to clean the house, and never let them lack anything. When people asked why she cared so much, she would say, "They found me when the world forgot me. Without them, I would not be alive today." Papa Edward would smile and say, "No, my daughter, it was God who sent you to us. You have been our blessing." Juliet grew into a fine young girl, brilliant, respectful, and full of life. She called Papa Edward Grandpa and Mama Rose Grandma. They loved her deeply, treating her like their own granddaughter. Sometimes, Vivian's mother and Frank would visit and meet them there. At first, it felt strange, two families from two different worlds, but with time, they blended like water and salt. Vivian made sure everyone felt welcome. She had learned that forgiveness does not erase the past, but it makes the future brighter. Even Auntie Grace visited one day. She came quietly, her head covered, her eyes swollen from tears. "Mama Rose told me I could come," she said softly. "I came to thank you for forgiving me. I don't sleep well at night. The things I did to you haunt me." Vivian looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Auntie, God has given me peace. I pray He gives you peace too." Auntie Grace cried and hugged her. It was not an easy hug, but it was honest. As the months passed, life became gentle again. Vivian's work at the hospital was going well. She was respected and loved by her patients. People often came to her not only for medicine but also for comfort. They said, "Dr. Vivian's smile can heal a broken heart." At home, she spent her evenings with Juliet and Mama Rose, reading stories or cooking together. Sometimes, she would sit outside at night, looking at the stars, remembering her father. "Papa," she would whisper, "I hope you can see me now. I made it." The pain of yesterday had turned into the strength of today. Vivian had learned that life could be cruel, but it could also be kind if you let love lead the way. But life, as always, had another surprise waiting for her, one that would come quietly, like the evening wind, and change her story once again. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Papa Edward received a call. He smiled as he dropped the phone and said, "Mama Rose, our son is coming home." Their only child, Michelle, had been living abroad for many years. He had gone to manage the family business overseas but had now decided to return to Nigeria to take care of his aging parents and their company. When Vivian heard the news, she was happy for them. "That's wonderful, Papa," she said. "You've missed him so much." Papa Edward nodded with a proud smile. "Yes, my daughter. You will like him. He has a good heart." A few weeks later, Michel arrived. He was tall, gentle, and spoke with the calmness of someone who had seen the world but still respected home. When he met Vivian, he smiled warmly and said, "So, this is the famous Dr. Vivian I've heard so much about." Vivian laughed shyly. "And you must be the Michel I've heard about since forever." From that day, their friendship began. Michel was different from other men Vivian had met. He was patient, humble, and kind. He often joined her in helping Papa Edward and Mama Rose, fixing things around the house, cooking, or sitting outside in the evenings to share stories. He also spent time with Juliet. The little girl liked him from the start. "Uncle Michel," she would say, "you tell funny stories." Sometimes, after dinner, they would all sit outside under the moonlight. Michel would play soft music on his phone while Vivian listened quietly, her heart at peace. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Their friendship slowly grew into something deeper, something that felt like healing and home. One evening, Michel found Vivian sitting alone in the garden. "You always look at the stars," he said gently. "What do you see up there?" Vivian smiled faintly. "I see hope. And I see my father. I like to think he's watching over me." Michel sat beside her. "You've been through a lot, Vivian. But you never let it break you. That's rare." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "Pain taught me patience. Love taught me forgiveness." Michel nodded slowly. "And what has forgiveness taught you?" Vivian thought for a moment, then whispered, "That it's the only way to live free." He smiled. "You are stronger than you know." That night, Michel could not sleep. He had seen beauty in many forms, in cities, in people, in success, but what he saw in Vivian was different. It was the beauty of a soul that had survived. Months later, on a calm evening, Michel asked Mama Rose and Papa Edward to gather in the sitting room. Vivian was there too, confused. Michel knelt down and took her hand. "Vivian," he said softly, "you came into our lives when we least expected it. You have been a daughter to my parents, a mother to Juliet, and a light in this house. I don't want to imagine life without you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Vivian's eyes. For a moment, she could not speak. Then she whispered, "Yes, Michel. Yes." Mama Rose cried with joy, and Papa Edward lifted his hands and said, "God is good. The daughter we found has now become our daughter-in-law." Everyone laughed, and even Juliet jumped into Michel's arms shouting, "Mommy is getting married." For the first time in her life, Vivian felt what real happiness tasted like, soft, peaceful, and pure. The wedding was small but beautiful. Both families came, Miriam, Frank, and even Auntie Grace. There were tears, smiles, and songs. And when Vivian looked at Michel, she knew the storms of her past had finally led her to the calm of today. Years passed, and the story of Dr. Vivian Michel Edward became one that people in Jos and far beyond spoke about with admiration. She and Michel built a happy home filled with laughter, warmth, and love. Their union was blessed with 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Juliet grew up as their first child, strong and brilliant, proud of her mother's courage and her father's kindness. Vivian never forgot where she came from. Even with her new life, she still visited her village to see her mother, Miriam, and her brother, Frank. She built her mother a new house with white paint and a blue roof, the kind of house her father had always dreamed of before his death. Each visit was filled with smiles and stories. The villagers looked at Vivian with respect. They often said, "Look at the girl who was once cast out. She has become a blessing to many." Vivian would just smile and reply, "It was not my strength, but God's mercy. Pain didn't destroy me, it built me." Frank got married and started his own family. He worked as a teacher and always told his students, "Don't laugh at someone who comes to school dirty or late. You don't know their story." Miriam, now old and gray, often sat on the veranda of her new house and watched her grandchildren play. She would whisper, "God gave me a second chance through my daughter." Even Auntie Grace, who had aged and moved back to the village after her husband's death in prison, came sometimes to help Miriam in the small farm behind the house. Life had humbled her. She spoke less and prayed more. Vivian forgave her fully. Sometimes, she even sent her food and medicine. When people asked why, she simply said, "Forgiveness is not for the person who hurt you. It is for your own peace." In Jos, Vivian and Michelle continued their work at the hospital and the family company. Together, they built a foundation that helped young girls who had been abused or abandoned, giving them shelter, education, and hope. Each time Vivian spoke to the girls, she would begin with the same words, "I was once like you. But remember, no matter what the world takes from you, never let it take your heart." Papa Edward and Mama Rose lived long enough to see their grandchildren grow. Before they passed, they blessed Vivian and Michelle, saying, "You both brought light into our old age. We can now rest in peace." Their graves were placed side by side, under a mango tree in the family compound. Every year, Vivian and her family visited to lay flowers and tell stories. One evening, many years later, Vivian sat outside her home watching her children play under the sunset. Michelle came and sat beside her, holding her hand. He asked softly, "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" Vivian smiled, her eyes glistening. "Every day," she said. "Sometimes, when I look at them," she pointed at the children, "I remember that little girl who once slept in an unfinished house with no hope. If only she could see this now." Michelle squeezed her hand gently. She would be proud of the woman she became. Vivian leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Life came full circle, Michelle. And it ended in peace." The sun slowly disappeared behind the hills of Jos, leaving behind a golden light, a light that spoke of forgiveness, love, and new beginnings. And that was how the story of Vivian, the girl who once lost everything, became the story of a woman who found everything that truly mattered. And that brings us to the end of today's story, the story of Vivian, a girl who turned her pain into purpose and found peace at last. If you were touched by her journey, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who loves African stories, and subscribe to this channel for more inspiring tales like this. Every click, every share, and every comment helps us keep telling stories that remind us of hope, love, and forgiveness. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.